Why won't the cards go through? My mother-in-law and I couldn't cover lunch. Ryan's call came early, the kind of early that still tastes like sleep. His voice wasn't just upset, it was cracked open, raw with panic, like a man standing at the edge of something that finally stopped holding him up. "Mom," he said, and there was a hitch between syllables. "Why are all the cards declined?" Dana's mom and I couldn't even pay for lunch. People were staring. They were laughing. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. I should have felt my stomach drop. I should have felt shame, fear, a rush to fix it, because that's what I'd trained myself to do for years. Instead, something else rose in me, calm and cold and strangely steady, like the quiet that comes after a long storm when the trees are still dripping but the wind is gone. To understand why his humiliation didn't break my heart, you have to understand how thoroughly mine had been spent. I was 68, widowed for several years. The sort of woman people described as sweet, because I held my tongue, because I smiled through discomfort, because I didn't make a scene. I lived in the same house my husband and I had worked for, kept it clean, kept it respectable, kept it full of small routines. Coffee in the morning, laundry on Wednesdays, the bird feeder refilled before sunrise. I told myself I was living peacefully. But peace isn't the same thing as being safe. For the last decade, I had become something else to my son and his wife. Not a mother. Not family. A resource. A convenient, dependable river of money they could dip into without looking at the depth. It hadn't started as cruelty. It rarely does. It started as a need to dress up in the language of love. 10 years ago, Ryan lost his job. He called me one evening, trying to sound casual, trying not to sound scared. "It's temporary," he said. "Just a couple months, Mom. I've got interviews lined up." I remember sitting at my kitchen table with my old phone pressed to my ear, staring at the grain of the wood as if it could tell me what to do. My husband had already been gone by then, and Ryan was all I had in the world that felt like family. I sent money for rent. $800. Then again next month. And again. 8 months in total, each payment quietly carved out of my pension. I told myself it was what a mother did. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary became normal, so gradually I didn't notice when my own life began to shrink. When Dana wanted a professional refresh for her wardrobe, she took me shopping the way someone takes a wallet. She held up blouses and shoes and smiled too brightly. "I'm building a future," she said. "It's important I look the part." $3,000 went onto my card, and I didn't even get a thank you that felt like it had weight. When they announced they were desperate for a break, and had earned it, a vacation to Hawaii appeared on my credit statement like a bruise. $5,000. I wasn't invited. I was never invited. When I hinted, gently, that I'd always wanted to see the ocean, Ryan laughed like I'd told a harmless joke. "It's a romantic trip, Mom," he said, the way you explain something obvious to a child. "You understand." And I did. I understood so much that it became convenient. Over time, it wasn't even requested anymore. It was an assumption. They spoke about my money as if it belonged to the family by default, as if my decades of work and sacrifice were simply a shared pool they managed. The last straw before the humiliation had come 3 months earlier with the car. Dana arrived at my house in the middle of the afternoon carrying a smile the way people carry a tray. Careful, practiced, balancing something fragile. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, sighed dramatically, and rubbed her hands together as if she were cold. "Our car is getting too old, Georgia," she said, using my first name like we were friends. "It doesn't feel safe. And if we're going to have kids soon." She let that hang in the air like a ribbon tied around a box. "We need something reliable." Ryan followed, nodding along. "She's right, Mom. It's about safety. Safety. Future. Family." Those words were always the key they used. When Dana slid the number across the conversation, $15,000 for a down payment, I felt something in me tense. $15,000 wasn't just money. It was time. It was the years I'd spent working past exhaustion. It was the night I'd chosen cheap groceries over comfort. It was the cushion that kept an older woman from falling too hard if life turned. I said yes anyway. I told myself it was for the good of the family. I told myself I was investing in stability. I told myself so many things that sounded noble, because nobility is easier to swallow than admitting you're being used. Then came the evening that snapped something into focus. It was an ordinary gathering, which is what made it worse. Dana had invited a few friends over. Women with polished nails and bright voices, the kind who laughed loudly to prove they were having fun. Ryan was there too, slouched comfortably, as if my home was his lounge and I was part of the furniture. I made coffee because that's what I did. I moved around my own kitchen the way a quiet worker moves around a workplace. Efficient, invisible, careful not to disturb anyone important. I carried the pot into the living room, steam curling up like a soft warning. Dana was mid-conversation with her friends, telling some story, enjoying the attention. She glanced at me, and something in her expression sharpened, as if remembering I existed irritated her. Then she said it. Not to me. Not privately. Not even with a hint of shame. That old woman is only good for paying our bills. The room didn't go silent. It got louder, because laughter broke out right away. Her friends giggled in that cruel, delighted way people do when they think they're safe from consequences. And my son, my own son, threw his head back and laughed as if it were the best joke of the night. I stood there with the coffee pot in my hand, my smile frozen halfway into existence because it had been trained into me for so long. My fingers tightened around the handle. My chest felt oddly hollow, like someone had scooped out the soft part and left the shell. They kept laughing. Ryan didn't say, "Stop." He didn't say, "That's my mother." He didn't even look uncomfortable. He laughed because it pleased Dana. Because it kept him on the right side of her, on the side where things were easy for him. And in that moment, a truth I had avoided for years slid into place like a lock clicking shut. To them, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't family. I was a function. A bank account with a heartbeat. I remember looking down at the coffee pot, the brown liquid trembling slightly as my hand shook. Not from sadness. From rage so clean it felt like ice. I served them anyway. That's how deep the habit ran. I poured coffee, placed cups, nodded along, and said almost nothing. Inside, something was rewriting itself. Later, after they left and the house settled into the kind of silence that makes every tick of the clock sound like a question, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my hands. These were hands that had worked, cooked, cleaned, held my son when he was small. These were hands that had signed checks and swiped cards and typed passwords and made it all possible. And those hands had been laughed at. I went to bed that night, but sleep wouldn't take me. Not because I was crying. I wasn't. Not because I was heartbroken. That had happened in slow motion for years. What I felt now was clarity, bright and painful like stepping into winter sunlight. At 3 a.m, I got out of bed. The house was dark. The air felt different, as if the walls themselves were listening. I turned on my computer in my study, the screen lighting my face in pale blue. My email was full of automatic confirmations from stores I hadn't shopped at. My bank app showed transfers that arrived and disappeared like magic. My credit accounts displayed charges that were familiar and unfamiliar all at once. Restaurants I never visited, subscriptions I'd never heard of, shiny little luxuries that had been fed with my life. I didn't hesitate. I began canceling cards. Not my primary card, the one I used carefully, but the additional cards linked to my accounts. 5 of them. 5 pieces of plastic that had been living in their wallets like permission slips. Each cancellation felt like unclipping a heavy chain I'd forgotten I was dragging. Then I closed the shared savings account. The account I had told myself was for emergencies. The family backup. The place where money went every month, money I could have used to travel, to repair things in my home, to breathe easier. Emergencies had somehow always looked like expensive meals, designer clothes, weekend trips, and new gadgets. I changed passwords. I removed their names from automatic transfers. I turned off every pipeline I had built to keep them comfortable. When the final confirmation message popped up on the screen, "Your request has been processed," I leaned back in my chair and realized my shoulders didn't feel tense anymore. At 6 in the morning, I made coffee. Real coffee, just for me. I sat in my favorite armchair by the window and watched the faint light of dawn seep into the neighborhood. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the fake peace of staying quiet to avoid conflict, but the real kind, the kind that comes when you finally stop betraying yourself. I knew the call would come. I didn't know the exact minute, but I knew the hunger. I knew the entitlement. I knew the way my phone had become their emergency button. It rang at 9:15. Ryan's name lit up my screen. I watched it ring, once, twice, 3 times, letting the sound fill the room like a metronome for my decision. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. When I answered, I didn't sound angry. I didn't sound shaky. I sounded calm. "Good morning, Ryan." His voice came rushing through the speaker like water bursting from a pipe. "Mom, what is going on?" "None of the cards work. We're at Crestview Grill. Dana's mom is here. It's her birthday, and we can't pay. It's humiliating. The waiter is just standing here. People are looking. I don't have enough cash for a $200 bill. Fix this." Crestview Grill. The most expensive restaurant in town. The place I'd paid for more than once when they went out as a couple. The place I'd never been invited to. The place they used as a stage for their image. Now the stage lights were on, and they had forgotten their lines. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, not because it was too loud, but because I wanted to savor the strange symmetry of it all. Then I brought it back and said, evenly, "The cards are cancelled." There was a pause so sharp I could almost hear it. "What?" His voice jumped. "Cancelled. Are you serious?" "Mom, we're in public." "Yes," I said. "I'm serious." "You can't do that," he hissed, like I'd committed a crime against him. "Dana's mother is right here. How do you expect me to explain this? Everyone is watching." There it was. Not concerned. Not guilt. Not, "Mom, are you okay?" Just, "How will I look?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "What's ridiculous," I said, "is hearing you laugh last night when Dana said I'm only good for paying your bills." His breath caught. "Mom, she was joking. She said what she meant," I replied. "And you agreed with her. You made it clear what I am to you." In the background, I could hear voices, Dana's bright edge, an older woman's irritated tone, the soft professional patience of a waiter standing too long. Ryan lowered his voice as if whispering would make his situation less real. "Please. Not now. Just fix it for today. I promise we'll talk. I promise we'll change things. Just for today." Those words had carried my life away one small surrender at a time. I laughed softly, but it wasn't humorous. It was recognition. "No more promises, Ryan," I said. "No more, just this once. 10 years of just this once is how we got here." His voice sharpened. "So what do you want us to do? Wash dishes? You want the police called? You're humiliating us." "You're 35, I said. "You can solve your own problems." "Mom, this isn't like you," he pleaded, and for a second he sounded genuinely afraid, not of losing me, but of losing the version of me that was useful. "Are you sick? Are you okay? You've never been this cruel." Cruel. The word landed in my chest like a slap, but it didn't knock me down. It woke me up. "Cruel was laughing at me in my own home," I said quietly. "Cruel was treating me like I'm invisible unless I'm paying for something. Cruel was turning my love into your lifestyle." He started to talk again, but I didn't let him. "Listen carefully," I said. "I am your mother. Not your employee. Not your bank. Not your safety net for expensive choices." "But what will people think?" he burst out. "This is going to get out, Someone already has their phone out. Mom, please, this is going to be everywhere. And there it was again. No remorse. Image. I closed my eyes, feeling the steadiness return like a hand on my shoulder. For years, I said, I worried about your comfort and your reputation. Now I'm going to worry about mine. His voice cracked. Desperate. Dana is crying. Her mom is furious. Please. Have mercy. Mercy is earned, I said. And you spent yours. I ended the call. For a moment, the house was silent except for the faint hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing outside. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with adrenaline. With the shock of finally choosing myself. And even as my phone began ringing again, and again, I sat back in my chair, stared out the window at the morning light, and understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The phone didn't stop after I hung up. It rang the way a fire alarm rings, insistent, accusing, impossible to ignore if you're still the kind of person who believes every alarm is your job to answer. I let it ring anyway. Ryan called again. Then Dana. Then a number I didn't recognize, which I assumed belonged to Dana's mother. I watched the screen light up, go dark, light up again, like a small frantic creature trapped behind glass. Each buzz should have pulled me back into the old role. Each buzz should have triggered the reflex to soothe, to explain, to make it better. Instead, every missed call felt like another brick in a wall I'd never allowed myself to build. I poured more coffee. I carried my mug out to the back patio and sat in the chair that faced my bird feeder. The birds didn't care about credit cards or public embarrassment. They came, pecked, fluttered, left. Simple. Honest. No performance. I took a breath and tried to notice how my body felt now that I wasn't bracing for someone else's needs. My shoulders were still tight, but it wasn't the old tension. It was the kind you feel when you've finally done something irreversible and your body is catching up to your mind. At 11, I heard a car swing into my driveway too fast. 2 doors slammed. Footsteps, hurried and heavy, crossed the front walk. The first knock was loud enough to rattle the picture frames in my hallway. Mom. Open the door. Ryan's voice carried through the house as if he assumed volume could turn a boundary into a suggestion. We need to talk. I didn't move. Another knock. Then the sound of a fist hitting wood hard, angry. I know you're in there, he shouted. Your car's here. Dana joined in, her voice sharp, cutting right through Ryan's desperation. Georgia. Stop acting like a child. A child. Interesting word, coming from a woman who had treated me like a tool for years and was now throwing a tantrum because the tool had stopped working. The pounding continued. I stayed on my patio, out of sight from the front windows, listening. It was strange how quickly you can recognize someone's true character when you stop cushioning their consequences. Their voices weren't worried about me. They weren't asking if I was all right. They were furious because their lives had been interrupted. This is ridiculous, Dana yelled. You made us look like beggars. My mother had to pay for lunch. So that was how it ended. Not with them finding a solution, not with Ryan suddenly discovering the magic of adulthood, but with Dana's mother stepping in and saving them. A woman my age digging into her purse because 2 grown adults couldn't cover their own bill. The image almost made me smile. Ryan's voice softened, as if he remembered the old rules. Mom, please. People were staring. Someone was filming. This is going to spread. Always the same theme. Not what they'd done. Not what they'd said. Just what other people might see. Dana's voice shifted too, changing texture the way she always did when she wanted something. The shrill rage melted into a syrupy calm. Georgia, she called, sweet as honey and just as sticky. I know you're upset. You have every right. But what I said yesterday, it came out wrong. It was just a joke. You know how we women are when we're together. We say things. We don't mean them. I stared at the bird feeder, watching a small finch hop along the edge, fearless and precise. A joke. That's what she wanted it to become. Something harmless. Something I was supposed to forgive quickly so she could keep living exactly the way she'd been living. I heard footsteps moving along the side of my house. They were circling now, trying windows, trying angles, trying to locate me like you locate a problem you want to solve, not a person you want to understand. Dana's voice rose near my side window. We saw your shadow. We know you're in there. Stop hiding like a coward. Coward. That word was meant to pierce, meant to drag me out to defend myself, meant to force me back into the familiar dance. I could almost predict the next moves. Guilt, tears, threats, public shame, then promises. I stood and walked quietly inside, not because I was scared, but because I was curious. I wanted to see her face when she realized I wasn't disappearing. I approached the window, pulled the curtain back just an inch, and met her eyes through the glass. Her expression flickered like a broken light. First fury. Then relief. Then a smile that looked practiced, like a mask she snapped into place because she remembered the world might be watching. There you are, she said brightly, as if she'd found a lost purse. Come on, open the door. Let's talk like a family. Family. She used the word like a lever. I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the calm in my bones. Then I let the curtain fall back into place, sealing her out. Outside, Dana shrieked, a sharp, frustrated sound that had nothing to do with reconciliation. The pounding resumed, louder now, angrier. Someone kicked the door. I heard Ryan muttering, trying to hold her back, trying to keep her from escalating into something that might leave consequences they couldn't charm away. From the patio, I could hear fragments. We can't just stand here. Call a locksmith. That's illegal. I don't care. I did care. Not about their feelings, but about my safety. My home was mine. I had let them treat it like a stage for too long, like a place they could come, demand, take, and leave. I wasn't going to let them break into it simply because they were angry. Eventually, the pounding slowed. Their voices became lower, more urgent, like two people realizing their old tools weren't working. Then, after what felt like an hour, the car doors slammed again. The engine started. The sound faded down the street. Silence returned. And in that silence, I felt something new. Not just power, but sorrow. Not because I regretted it. Because I finally saw the full truth. If I had been in danger, if I had been sick, if I had fallen, this wasn't how they would have shown up. They showed up like creditors. Like customers furious at a service interruption. I stood in my kitchen and watched the clock until my breathing steadied. Then I did what I should have done years ago. I began to plan. I unplugged the house phone first. It was a simple act, but it changed the air in the room. No ringing. No sudden demands. No electronic leash. I put my cell phone on silent. I left it on the counter like an object that belonged to me, not to them. That afternoon, the calls resumed anyway. Unknown numbers, family members, people recruited to apply pressure. The first voice was Dana's mother's. Polite. Firm. The tone of someone who believed she had authority. Georgia dear, she said. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Dana told me you were upset over something she said. I'm sure we can resolve this like civilized adults. I didn't answer. I simply ended the call. Then my sister Elaine called from out of state. Elaine had always been the calm one, the reasonable one, the one who believed family problems could be solved with a conversation and a casserole. Georgia, she said, worried wrapped around every word. Ryan called me. He says you cancelled everything. He says you left them stranded at a restaurant. Are you okay? Are you feeling sick? It was remarkable how quickly my boundaries became framed as illness. It was easier for them to believe I was unwell than to believe I was finally awake. I'm fine, I said. I'm better than I've been in years. Elaine exhaled, but her worry didn't lift. But why would you do it like that? They're your family. They laughed at me, I replied. In my own home. Dana said I'm only good for paying their bills. Ryan laughed with her. Elaine hesitated. Dana probably didn't mean it like that. You know how people joke. I stared out my kitchen window at my own lawn, trimmed and neat, the kind of lawn you keep when you've spent your life maintaining appearances. Elaine, I said softly, is it normal to pay your adult child's rent for 8 months? Is it normal to finance vacations you're not invited on? Is it normal to cover their luxuries while you deny yourself basic comfort? Elaine was quiet. I'm not saying you shouldn't help your family, I continued. I'm saying it stopped being held a long time ago. It became an expectation. Ownership. They stopped seeing my money as mine. Elaine's voice tightened, a hint of judgment slipping through. But cutting them off all at once, that's drastic. What's drastic, I said, is realizing they've been spending what I worked decades to save, as if my future didn't matter. Elaine tried again, softer now. Maybe you can talk to them. Maybe you can set boundaries without this. She meant consequences. She meant discomfort. I ended the call with a polite goodbye and sat down at my kitchen table, hands flat on the wood. My heart was steady. My mind was steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty. That was the moment I understood how deeply guilt had been trained into me. It had been my leash. The invisible rope they tugged any time I hesitated. It was the weapon that made me hand over money while telling myself I was doing the right thing. Now the leash was gone. As evening arrived, I went into my study where I kept my financial papers. If I was going to protect myself properly, I needed to stop dealing in vague feelings and start dealing in facts. I pulled out bank statements, credit card records, transfers, automatic payments. I stacked them in piles across my desk, the way you stack evidence when you're finally ready to admit you've been robbed. At first, the numbers blurred. Not because I couldn't read them, but because my mind resisted. There's a certain kind of pain that comes not from loss itself, but from realizing you agreed to it. But I kept going. I added, subtracted, wrote totals on sticky notes, moved through months and years like pages in a book I'd refused to read. After hours, I sat back and looked at the final figure I had documented for just the last 5 years. $86,000. My breath caught. Not because I didn't believe it, but because seeing it in ink made it real in a way excuses never could. 86,000 in 5 years, not even counting the years before that when I didn't keep perfect records, when I simply paid and hoped things would improve. It wasn't just the amount. It was what the amount represented. It represented the trips I didn't take, the repairs I postponed, the clothes I didn't buy, the medical appointments I delayed, the ease I never allowed myself. And what had I gotten in return? Mockery. Indifference. A joke made at my expense, served like entertainment to guests in my own living room. I kept flipping through statements, my eyes scanning line after line. That's when I saw it. Small charges repeated monthly, like tiny leaks that become floods if you never notice them. Premium streaming services. A gym membership I never knew existed. Magazine subscriptions I didn't read. Food delivery charges from neighborhoods I'd never been to. They weren't only spending big, they were draining me quietly too, through dozens of little luxuries that had become invisible. My hands trembled again. This time, not from adrenaline, but from the sharp understanding that I hadn't merely been helping. I had been exploited. Systematically. Casually. Without even the courtesy of pretending to be ashamed. That night, after the papers were stacked and the totals were written, I opened the file cabinet where I kept my will. I had drafted it 5 years earlier, when I still believed in the story I'd been telling myself. That I was securing Ryan's future, that my sacrifice would become his stability, that my love would be honored when I was gone. Ryan was the sole beneficiary. The house. The savings. The investments. Everything. I held the document in my hands and stared at my own signature. It looked like the signature of a woman who trusted her child. I no longer recognized her. Why should I leave everything to a man who had already spent more than half of it while I was still alive? Why should my final gift reward the behavior that had hollowed out my years? A decision formed in me like a solid object. Tomorrow, I will call my lawyer. I would change what I had been too afraid to change before. If Ryan wanted to treat me like a bank, then he could learn something banks do better than mothers. Banks stop giving money when the borrower proves he won't respect the loan. I went to bed that night with a strange feeling. Not grief. Relief. And somewhere deep beneath that relief, something harder, something more protective, whispered a warning I didn't yet fully understand. They wouldn't accept this quietly. They would try to get my money back. And if they couldn't charm it out of me, they would try other ways. Morning came quietly, the way it always had, but I noticed something different almost immediately. I woke up without dread. For years, my mornings had begun with a subtle tension, a scanning of possibilities before my feet even touched the floor. Would today be the day Ryan called with another emergency? Would Dana text with a polite greeting followed by a request wrapped in justification? Would there be another expense disguised as necessity? That morning, there was none of that. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily, and listened to the house breathe. The silence felt earned, not empty. When I got up, I moved slowly, deliberately, as if I were relearning how to occupy my own life. I made breakfast just for myself. Toast, eggs, fruit. Nothing rushed. I ate at the table instead of standing at the counter the way I usually did, ready to drop everything if the phone rang. The phone sat untouched, silent, where I'd left it the night before. After breakfast, I unplugged the house phone completely and set it inside a drawer. The finality of that small act sent a quiet thrill through me. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. By late morning, the calls resumed, on my cell this time. I watched unfamiliar numbers flash across the screen, one after another, like waves breaking against a wall. I didn't answer. At noon, I poured myself another coffee and opened the curtains to let in more light. That was when I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. The constant low-level anxiety I'd lived with for years, the feeling of waiting to be needed, was fading. At 1 o'clock, my sister Elaine called again. This time, I answered. "Georgia," she said immediately, "I'm really worried. Ryan sounds frantic. Dana says you're not acting like yourself." "I am acting like myself," I replied calmly. "Just not the version they trained." Elaine sighed. "They're saying you're punishing them over a joke." "It wasn't a joke," I said. "It was a confession." Elaine paused. "They're also saying you cut them off without warning." "I gave them 10 years of warning," I said. "Every check, every transfer, every yes, was a warning they ignored." Elaine's voice softened. "I know you've always been generous. But people are talking, Georgia. This is turning into a family issue." "It's always been a family issue," I said. "It just used to be private." After I hung up, I realized something else had changed. I wasn't trying to convince anyone anymore. For years, I'd explained myself into exhaustion, hoping someone would finally understand. Now, understanding wasn't required. Only acceptance. That afternoon, I called my lawyer's office. When the receptionist answered and asked how she could help, I felt a small, fierce satisfaction as I said, "I need to update my will." She scheduled me for the earliest available appointment, the next afternoon. I wrote it down in my planner, then stared at the page for a long moment. It felt symbolic, like I was rewriting not just a document, but the ending of a story I'd been trapped in. At 3 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Not pounding this time. Just firm, deliberate knocks spaced evenly apart. I didn't answer. Through the peephole, I saw Dana's mother standing on my porch, posture straight, handbag clutched tightly, lips pressed into a line that suggested she was already annoyed by my delay. She looked like a woman who expected doors to open for her. She knocked again. I waited another full minute, then opened the door just enough to face her without inviting her in. Georgia, she said, her tone polished. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I replied. She smiled thinly. I think we do. This situation is getting out of hand. What situation? I asked. The one where two adults can't pay their own bills. Her smile vanished. Dana told me what happened. I think you're exaggerating. Of course she did. Exaggeration was the word people used when they didn't want to face the truth. I'm not exaggerating, I said. I'm responding. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. You embarrassed them. That's not something a mother does. Something inside me hardened. A mother doesn't humiliate her child in public either, I said. But that didn't seem to bother you. She straightened. Families help each other. Yes, I said. Help. Not enabled. She scoffed. You sound bitter. No, I said. I sound done. Her eyes narrowed. You should think carefully about what you're doing. Cutting off your son like this. People will start asking questions. Let them, I said. I have answers. She studied me for a long moment, as if reassessing. Then she said something that confirmed every instinct I'd had since this began. You know, she said quietly, people your age sometimes make impulsive decisions. Financial ones. It can be concerning. I felt the chill immediately. Are you suggesting I'm not competent? I asked. She shrugged, the gesture almost delicate. I'm just saying there are processes. Protections. If someone appears unstable. I looked at her fully then, really looked at her, and saw what she was trying to do. Threaten me. Let me be very clear, I said. I am protecting myself from financial abuse. If anyone suggests otherwise, my lawyer will be happy to address it. Her expression flickered, surprise, then irritation. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said. This conversation is over. I closed the door before she could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't weak. It was anger sharpened by clarity. They weren't just trying to guilt me back into compliance. They were willing to question my sanity to regain access to my money. That evening, I called my lawyer again and told him exactly what had happened. He wasn't surprised. It's more common than you think, he said. Document everything. Save messages. Write down dates and names. You're doing the right thing. That night, I slept lightly but peacefully. My mind was alert, watchful, but not afraid. Fear had been replaced by resolve. The next morning, I went to a clinic and requested a full psychological evaluation. The doctor listened carefully as I explained the situation. She asked thoughtful questions, not just about the conflict, but about my finances, my routines, my decision-making. The evaluation took hours. When she finished, she smiled. You are demonstrating excellent judgment, she said. Recognizing exploitation and setting boundaries is not instability. It's healthy. She gave me a signed report stating clearly that I was mentally competent, fully capable of managing my affairs. I held that document like armor. When I got home, my neighbor Lucy was in her yard. She waved when she saw me. Georgia, she called. I'm glad you're back. I was worried yesterday. Someone came asking about you. My stomach tightened. Who? An older woman. Well-dressed. Asking if you'd been acting strangely. I told her you seemed happier than I'd seen you in years. I laughed, a sharp sound that surprised even me. Thank you, Lucy. She leaned on the fence. You know, she said gently, I've watched your son and his wife for years. I never wanted to say anything, but they never seemed to give as much as they took. Hearing it from someone else felt like stepping into daylight after years underground. That afternoon, I went to my lawyer's office. We sat across from each other as he reviewed my existing will. I told him everything, the money, the mockery, the threats. I want to change it, I said. Significantly. He nodded. What do you have in mind? I want to divide my estate, I said. A portion to charities. A portion to my sister. And Ryan. I paused. Ryan gets a reduced share, I continued, with conditions. He only receives it if he demonstrates sustained financial independence. The lawyer smiled slightly. That's entirely possible. For the first time in years, I felt like my future belonged to me. When I left his office, the sun was low and warm. I stopped at a small restaurant I'd always wanted to try. I ordered lunch. I didn't check prices. I didn't feel guilty. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, and realized something simple and profound. I wasn't taking anything away from my son. I was giving him the one thing I never had. The chance to grow up. And for the first time, I didn't feel like his bank. I felt like myself. When I returned home from lunch, the house felt different again. Not tense, not invaded, but alert, like it had learned something important and was adjusting. I placed my purse on the counter, hung my coat carefully, and stood still for a moment, listening. No knocking. No ringing. No voices demanding entry into my life. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. A real dinner. Not something quick and forgettable. Not something eaten while worrying about the next request. I chopped vegetables slowly, enjoying the sound of the knife against the cutting board. I played music in the background. Something soft, something I liked, not something chosen to avoid complaints. As I ate, I realized I didn't feel lonely. That surprised me. For years I'd been told, sometimes directly, sometimes through implication, that without my son and his wife constantly in my orbit, I would be alone. That my usefulness was the glue holding everything together. That if I stopped giving, I would be abandoned. But sitting there at my table, I felt whole. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and a sense of purpose. I had already taken the biggest steps, but there were still practical matters to handle. I gathered all my financial documents again, this time not to tally losses, but to secure what remained. I called my bank and scheduled an in-person appointment with the branch manager. At the bank, the manager greeted me politely, reviewed my requests, and asked, gently, why I wanted so many changes. I've realized my biggest financial risk isn't fraud, I said. It's family. He didn't look shocked. If anything, he looked relieved that I'd said it out loud. You're not alone, he said. We see this often. You're doing the right thing. We added extra security. Two-factor authentication. Alerts for any unusual activity. Restrictions that ensured no one but me could access or alter my accounts. When I signed the final form, I felt a strange sense of finality, as if I'd locked a door that should have been locked years ago. When I got home, there was a note slipped under my door. Georgia, we need to talk. This is getting out of control. Ryan. I stared at the handwriting for a long moment. It looked smaller than it used to, tighter, like someone trying to make themselves take up less space. I didn't respond. Not yet. That afternoon, my sister Elaine called again. This time, her tone was different, less urgent, more cautious. I spoke to Ryan, she said. He sounds shaken. He should be, I replied. Elaine hesitated. He said you're changing your will. Yes. That's a big step. So was draining my retirement, I said calmly. Elaine sighed. I'm not saying you're wrong. I hope this doesn't destroy your relationship. I thought about that for a moment. Elaine, I said, a relationship built on dependency isn't a relationship. It's a transaction. She didn't argue. That told me more than any reassurance could. The following day, Ryan showed up again, alone this time. I saw his car pull into the driveway and felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but it didn't control me. I waited. I watched through the window as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, forehead resting against the steering wheel, hands gripping it as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. When he finally came to the door, he didn't knock loudly. He knocked once. Then again, softer. Mom, he called. Please. I opened the door. He looked worse than he had before. Dark circles under his eyes. Clothes wrinkled. The confidence he used to wear like armor was gone. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I considered it. Then I stepped aside. He entered like someone walking into unfamiliar territory, glancing around as if expecting traps. He sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped together, shoulders hunched. "I'm not here to yell," he said quickly. "Dana's not here. I need to understand." I sat across from him, my posture relaxed, my hands resting calmly in my lap. "Understand what?" I asked. "Why now?" he said. "Why like this?" I studied his face, the same eyes I'd watched learn to read, the same mouth that once begged me to read one more bedtime story. "Because I finally heard the truth," I said. Out loud. Without excuses. He swallowed. "Dana didn't mean it." "It doesn't matter what she meant," I said. "It matters what she believed. And what you allowed." He flinched slightly. "I didn't think." "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't." Silence stretched between us, thick but not hostile. "Mom," he said finally, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to do this without you." That sentence told me everything. "You were never supposed to," I said. "You were supposed to learn." He rubbed his face with both hands. "We can't cover everything. The rent, the car, the insurance, it's too much." "Then something has to change," I replied. "We can't just change everything overnight." "I did," I said. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not entitlement, but fear mixed with realization. "You're serious," he said. "I've never been more serious about anything," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Dana's furious. I expect she is. She says you're punishing us." "I'm protecting myself," I said. "If that feels like punishment, maybe it's because the system was unfair." He sat there for a long time, breathing unevenly. Then he asked, quietly, "Is there any way back?" I considered that carefully. "There's a way forward," I said. "But it doesn't look like the past." He nodded again, wiping at his eyes. "I don't know if Dana can accept that." "That's her choice," I said. "Just like it's yours." He left shortly after, not angry, not relieved, but changed. I didn't know yet whether that change would last. But I knew this: whatever happened next would be real, not bought. That weekend, my neighbor Lucy came over with coffee and pastries. "I heard some noise earlier this week," she said gently. "I almost called the police." "I appreciate that," I replied. She smiled knowingly. "You know, I've seen this before. Adult children who never learn where the line is." "What happened?" I asked. "Some parents never draw it," she said. "And some draw it too late. You didn't." Her words settled into me like reassurance. Before she left, Lucy said something that stayed with me. "You're not losing a family," she said. "You're losing a role that was hurting you." That night, I packed a small suitcase. Not because I was running away, but because I was going somewhere new. Lucy had mentioned a short cruise earlier in the week, one she'd planned with her sister before it was cancelled. 5 days. All inclusive. Modest, but comfortable. I booked it. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at it for a long moment. I'd spent thousands on vacations for other people without blinking. This time, spending money on myself felt radical. And right. On Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with a text. "Mom, I'm trying to figure things out. I don't know how this will end, but I'm thinking. Ryan." I didn't reply immediately. I went to the window instead and watched the sunlight spread across my yard. I thought about the years I'd lived bracing for other people's needs. I thought about the woman I was becoming, someone who didn't disappear when she said no. Then I typed back, "I'm glad you're thinking, so am I." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that had nothing to do with money. Hope. The morning I left for the cruise, the house felt lighter, as if it understood I was finally choosing movement instead of waiting. I woke before my alarm, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. My suitcase stood neatly by the door, modest but full, comfortable clothes, a book I'd been meaning to read for years, a dress I bought just because I liked how it looked on me. As I locked the door behind me, I paused for a moment, keys in hand. For decades, this house had been my anchor, my responsibility, my refuge, and sometimes my cage. Now, it felt like a place I was leaving temporarily, not escaping. That distinction mattered. Lucy arrived right on time, her smile bright, her energy contagious. "Ready?" she asked. "More than ready," I replied, and meant it in a way I never had before. The drive to the port was filled with easy conversation. No complaints. No whispered worries about money or appearances. Just two women talking about books, food, and places they'd always wanted to see. I realized, somewhere along the highway, that this was the first trip in years where I hadn't packed guilt along with my clothes. The cruise itself was a revelation. Not because it was luxurious, it wasn't, but because it was mine. I woke when I wanted, ate when I was hungry, chose activities based on curiosity instead of obligation. I sat on the deck and watched the ocean stretch endlessly, a quiet reminder that life was larger than the narrow role I'd allowed myself to inhabit. One evening, during dinner, Lucy introduced me to a few other women traveling alone or with friends. Conversation flowed easily, and before long, stories emerged, stories that felt uncomfortably familiar. One woman spoke about a son who borrowed money and never repaid it. Another described a daughter who used guilt like currency. A third admitted she'd emptied her retirement account to keep peace in her family. As I listened, something clicked into place. This wasn't just my story. There was a generation of parents, especially mothers, who had been taught that love meant sacrifice without limits, that saying no was a betrayal, that their worth diminished the moment they stopped providing. That night, standing on the deck with the ocean wind on my face, I felt both anger and relief. Anger for the years I'd lost to silence. Relief that I wasn't alone, broken, or cruel for finally choosing differently. On the third day of the cruise, my phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. Mom, Dana and I sat down and went through our finances. Actually went through them. I didn't realize how bad it was. I stared at the message for a long time. Then another came. "We're spending almost twice what we earned. I don't know how you covered it for so long. I'm ashamed." That word, ashamed, landed heavily. I typed slowly, carefully. "I covered it because I loved you. But love isn't meant to replace responsibility." There was no immediate reply. I slipped my phone back into my bag and returned to the moment, refusing to let hope rush ahead of reality. When I returned home 5 days later, the house welcomed me like an old friend instead of a burden. My answering machine held messages, but none were urgent, none demanded money or explanations. Ryan had called twice, just to say he hoped I was enjoying myself. Dana left a short message. "We'd like to talk when you're back. No pressure." No pressure. That alone told me something had shifted. Lucy came over the next morning with pastries, eager to hear every detail. We sat on the patio, laughing, trading stories, the sunlight warm on our faces. It felt like the beginning of a new rhythm. That afternoon, Ryan came by again. This time, he didn't sit in the car steeling himself. He rang the doorbell once and waited. He looked different, still tired, but steadier, like someone who had stopped running from the truth. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. "Of course," I replied. We sat at the table, not across from each other like opponents, but side by side. "We're moving," he said. "Smaller place. Cheaper rent." I nodded. "That sounds sensible." "We cancelled a lot of things," he continued. "Memberships. Subscriptions. Stuff we thought we needed." "And how does that feel?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he smiled faintly. "Terrifying. And kind of relieving." I recognized that feeling immediately. We paid the car insurance ourselves, he added. Took out a small loan. Not ideal, but it's ours. I met his eyes. I'm proud of you. The words surprised both of us. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if he'd been holding his breath. I wanted to apologize, he said quietly. Not just for what Dana said. For everything. I didn't see you as a person anymore. I saw you as backup. I reached out and placed my hand over his. I let that happen too, I said. But we're both learning now. A few days later, Dana asked to meet me for coffee. She arrived dressed simply, her confidence muted but not gone. When she spoke, there was no performance in her voice. What I said was wrong, she said. Cruel. And I meant it more than I wanted to admit. I appreciated the honesty. We've been living a lie, she continued. One you funded. And now? I asked. Now we're trying to live within reality, she said. It's not pretty. But it's real. She looked at me carefully. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. They can't, I said gently. But something new is possible. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Not manipulative this time, just tired and human. Weeks passed. Then months. The changes held. Ryan and Dana moved into their smaller apartment. They cooked more. Went out less. Complained sometimes, but to each other, not to me. Our visits became simpler. Quieter. Real. One Sunday, they came for lunch. They brought the food. Ryan cooked. Dana cleaned up without being asked. It wasn't dramatic. It was respectful. I revised my will again, this time with clarity instead of anger. I kept the conditions. Responsibility would be rewarded. Dependency would not. And for the first time, that felt fair, to all of us. One evening, months later, I sat on my patio watching the stars emerge one by one. The fountain in my garden murmured softly. I held a cup of tea and felt something deep and steady settle in my chest. I hadn't lost my family. I had lost my fear. I had learned, finally, that love does not require self-erasure. That generosity without boundaries becomes a prison. That dignity is not something you're given. It's something you choose to protect. It had taken me 68 years. But I had learned. And I would never unlearn it again.